Hey, this is EJK. This is going to be a TVP video analysis between TY and Deer played in Pro League. The players have spawned in a vertical position, so it's going to be important to keep in mind how the later stages of the game is going to unfold. As a four-player map and having multiple spawning areas that you can start in, the expansion pattern changes quite a bit. For example, 1 base, 2 base, 3 base, 4 base, and then your 5th base. If it was cross positions though, it'd be 1 base, 2 base, 3 base, 4 base, and then you can either take your 5th base there or your 5th base there. So since it's close air positions, it's going to be a little bit although the only thing that's really going to differentiate what's going on is where the third base is going to be for the most part. And the third base it's either going to have a high ground area or it's going to have 2 open attack paths. In this case, we'll be dealing with a high ground area for the duration of the game. TY opening up for a Reaper expand. Deer has gone for a traditional fast expand. One thing that I found pretty curious that I just wanted to point out that I've started to notice lately is if we take a look at the production tab, as soon as the cybernetics core finishes, Deer cannot immediately start any tech because he's starting his mothership core and then he's starting his adept. And then I believe he starts warp gate right after. And so even though his cybernetics core is up really fast, he really cannot start his tech as soon as the cybernetics core is finished. So although the Protoss player, basically the Protoss players have optimized their builds so that they max out their economy and they rush out their tech a lot slower. It's just something that I noticed the other day. And I was like, huh. See, now Deer's robotics facility is starting because he has enough gas for it. So Protoss tech really isn't too concerned with being rushed out as fast as possible anymore. Same with the Terran tech, I would say. You don't see that fast stim anymore compared to Heart of the Swarm style. Deer very smartly using his mothership core in the close air proximity to get some scouting done. Deer is very good at using his mothership core to do small pokes and harassments to obtain additional scouting information. He did scout with the probe earlier and he saw that there was a Reaper expand followed by a reactor, so the mothership core wasn't necessarily expecting to get much information that Deer didn't already know what TY was doing. So the second and third gateways going down for Deer with blinks started after the observer in the robotics facility. This is a very standard Protoss opener that we've seen become very popular lately. And this is followed up by a fast third base by the Protoss player. Generally speaking, you can try to get you usually get the third base before you warp in your second and third gateway. So you'll have the warp gates there, but then you'll put your nexus down and then you'll warp in your units instead of vice versa to get that nexus out as fast as possible. TY has gone for a very fast third base, and he's gone for stim play as well. I would consider this kind of a Terran macro cheese because Deer cannot scout it very fast, and if he the standard observer timing from a robotics facility first is about 4:20 to 4:30 when it gets to your base. So by the time that Deer sees it, if he wasn't planning on doing an all-in already, he's essentially allowed TY to get away with fast third command center for free. So a little bit of mind games going on for the best of one style that Pro League brings to the table. And we'll see how Deer reacts from here. He's now starting his third nexus, and I'm pretty sure that because he sees the delayed factor, he knows that the third command center is there even though he hasn't seen it himself. TY is also, his Reaper didn't, oh, I believe his Reaper did get scouting information in. So that's why his engineering bay is delayed, and he doesn't need turrets. And he's already starting his Marauder production very fast as well. You need to get up your Marauder production ASAP when you know your opponent is going for Blink Stalkers, so that they don't just infinitely kite your Marines for days. TY already has Marines out on the map. He has his Bioforce roaming around as well, taking the Watchtower, because he knows that Deer is not going to be moving out with his army anytime soon. And so TY has the map control at this point in time, and he's able to kind of has some wiggle room in where his army is able to move around, because as we see the two armies match up, having the 5 extra Marauders in his army means that his army is a lot more powerful than all of the Blink Stalkers that Deer currently has out on the field. A little bit of a mistake there by Deer. I'm not even sure if he purposefully did that just to draw away part of TY's army, just so that he could poke in with the Blink Stalkers, or if that was simply a mistake. Either way, getting that depot that had a call down on it wasn't too bad. And he's able to escape with the Warp Prism as well, because TY did not target it down. A little bit of miss micro there by TY. But the delayed DT rush didn't do too much damage after all. TY was able to get a whiff of it, and he essentially saw the DTs coming out, or he understood that the DTs were coming out of the Warp Prism, so he was able to shut it down without scouting it at all. So in this game, Deer is going to be going for a more Colossi-based tech route army composition. TY has accumulated a very large bio army, and the reason why he has such a large supply advantage right now is mostly because that third command center has not been punished in any way. Deer hasn't really been able to do anything to either A, play greedy himself and get ahead, or B, punish TY in a way so that the game is more even. So TY is definitely in a favorable position at this time in the game. Deer can't really afford to move out of his base. His Warp Prism is doing minimum amounts of damage. It is nice, this little add-up terrace. As soon as this +1 finished up, he shaded them in, but TY is already on top of it. As soon as the add-up shaded in, TY already had stimmed units there. What that tells us is that he's very in control of the minimap. Like, his eyes are glued to the minimap whenever he doesn't have to look other places. That's the only way you can get that fast of a reaction time, or you're just looking at the right place in the right time. One thing to note about Deer's play is that because he's getting the Colossi, and because he's going for double upgrades, he cannot afford a very large Blink Stalker army. In other words, the majority of his gas production is going to be going into Adepts, Colossus, and the double upgrades, and he's not going to have any room to get additional Blink Stalkers in. And Blink Stalkers is really the only thing that Protoss players have earlier on, besides the Archons, that can shut down Liberator harass. So Deer's army essentially, for the time being, is on a timer. TY is taking his 4th base on location because he knows that he's in a good spot. He knows that Deer cannot push out right now, otherwise he can just get surrounded and die, or he'd lose too much to a counterattack, etc., etc. With these Colossus-style armies, Colossus don't have a lot of mobility, and really, they're a lot more defensive than aggressive, which is, I think, a problem in my opinion, because having Colossus in your army and building towards the army that Deer is building towards, it doesn't really have an answer against Ghost Bio Viking Liberator that we see TY building here. TY very good at understanding what unit composition he needs at what time, and knowing exactly when he has a superior army so that he takes a fight because of it. And when a good time and when the opponent has a superior army as well, and when TY needs to back off as soon as possible. Deer's 4th base is also pretty late. Again, he's really turtling heavy here, besides the small Adeptress with the Warp Prism. And now he's starting to add in High Templar as well. Not a bad choice, I would say. I personally like to see the High Templar out before the Tempests. I don't think Tempests are very good if you're rushing them on 3 bases. You're essentially getting them too fast, and they can be easily outmaneuvered. And before you even have a big enough Tempest count to be effective against Liberators, you can usually deal a lot of damage in that timing window and cripple the Protoss economy. And then all of a sudden, they're left with Tempests as the majority of their army. So Deer did not have an observer in place to see this attack. However, he has 2 cannons, and he unleashes 4 photon overcharges. Now this might seem like kind of a botched attack by TY, but the reasoning behind TY doing this is simply to clear out the defense and to try to trade a little bit of his army. If we go back a little bit right before the fight, the medevacs were highlighted, and they have high energy, so TY has essentially, like, there has been nothing going on this entire game, and this is the first thing that's happened. When TY maxes out, he wants to trade out some of his Widow Mines and his bio units for essentially some defense. And although this attack does not look like it's doing much, the important thing that it's doing is it got rid of 2 cannons, it got rid of all the Mothership Core's energy, and it got rid of a couple pylons, and it killed 10 probes as well. So TY might have lost a big chunk of his army, but he did do some economic damage, and he did clear up the defense, the initial defense that Deer had there. So now that TY's army is over here on the map, I think I like that better. So since TY's army is, I want it smaller, to be honest. I don't know how to make it small. There we go. So since TY's army is over here, that threatens Deer's 4th base. So Deer has to defend over here, and TY is also creating vulnerabilities over here as well. So Deer's army essentially has to, well, since TY's army is closer to the 4th base currently through walking distance, Deer's army is now going to the 4th base away from the natural where it was. But we see here that TY's medevacs are using the air path, and so they're going into the natural. And if we remember what the first drop did, it cleared out all the initial defenses that Deer might have. The photon cannons, the pylons, and the Mothership Core energy. So we see a lot more success in the second attack simply because Deer no longer has any defense. We see here it's essentially a bare natural. And Deer is scrambling back because he needed to have his whole army in position at the 4th base. Now he needs his army to defend the bio over here, and the Colossus are very clunky, the Vikings being able to pick off a couple of them already. I think maybe just one went down. Yeah, one actually just went down. Deer had good zoning with the Stalkers and the Sentry. And so another 6 probes go down, so it's a total of 16 probes killed, and the natural base of Deer died. So Deer is essentially taken off an entire base, and we see his 4th base is only 6 out of 16, so it has an efficiency of about 40%. The way that efficiency in a base goes is 16 out of 16 is obviously 100% efficiency. For each SCV up to the 16th, it increases by X amount, and that's the maximum amount. Your 17th SCV, when you add that on, it slightly tapers off, and then slightly tapers off again with your 18th, and then by the time it's like 19th, 20, 21, your efficiency starts to become, or it starts to decrease by a lot per worker. So up until you get to the 16 out of 16 mark, your economy technically is not going to be at 100%. So when I say that Deer's 4th base economy was only at 40%, he had 6 out of 16 probes mining, so he's essentially below 8 out of 16 which would be the 50% mark. So that's why I say Deer's fourth base was 40%. And then now he lost his natural. His main's going to be mined out by this time. And his third base, it should be fully saturated. So Deer would essentially be on a fully saturated third base, a half saturated fourth base, and the natural base is dead. Whereas TY has his natural base that didn't die, his third base that's fully saturated, and his fourth base that's been taking a little time to get saturated. We see Deer now going for a counterattack with his army. This attack, Deer understands that there's a timing window that he can hit right now because TY threw away a chunk of his army. We see that Deer has the superior army count right now. However, as we see Deer's army move around, there's not really anywhere that Deer can go. This is a very poor space to fight. The sentry's getting EMP'd, so their guardian, and they pop their guardian shields as well. So they essentially have no energy left, so that a force field escape retreat is no longer an option. And we see here, Deer is really stuck between, he's stuck between a fourth base with the planetary, with TY's army, a natural base that leads to a dead end main base that not his entire army can get to, and the third base, which is quite far away, but I think would be the safest option. However, Deer doesn't have any kind of way to cover his retreat. He doesn't have the mothership core to warp his army out. He doesn't have much storm left. We see highlighted, that's about 2 storms per Templar, assuming that they all go off. And he, of course, doesn't have any more sentry energy because he popped the guardian shields, and I believe the sentries got EMP'd as well. So Deer decides the fourth base, planetary with the army, no go. He pokes into the natural. He also understands that he cannot go into the natural or main base because he essentially traps his army. So he backs out, and what he ends up doing is trying to snipe the fourth base really fast. However, fighting with the planetary, it's not very good, and only with one immortal. The adepts don't really do any damage. The stalkers don't really do any damage to the planetary fortress. There really wasn't any DPS to be able to hit the planetary fortress very fast. And now we see TY punishing Deer for overextending. That's why I think, personally, Deer should have gone towards the third base. It's the least defended, and you could still, I think, technically get out with the retreat, depending on how confident TY was feeling in being able to take an engagement. So losing his entire army really, really sucked. TY's up 40 supply now, and now it's his turn to start moving out on the map. Deer doesn't have a Colossi count. He's only on 3 bases right now, and he can't afford to remake much of his very gas-expensive army at this point in the game. His army currently is primarily composed of stalkers, adepts, and a couple archons sprinkled here and there. So TY is very patiently waiting. He knows that, or his game plan essentially is that the hardest part, or the hardest stage of playing on this map is when you're going from the 4 to 5 base stage. Generally speaking, you can take a 5th base if you're ahead, or if it's a more even game and you control the watchtower. That gives you some form of map control, although warp prisms really diminish the ability to control the other side of the map very well, and same with drops. So taking a 5th base is very, very difficult for both players. TY knows that, there's no reason for him to attack right now. He knows that all he has to do is essentially wait for Deer to mine out while taking a 5th base of his own, which we see happening here. And although Deer has a formidable army right now, if we look at the production tab, 1 Colossi, 6 more adepts warping in, this is a very poor unit composition that the Protoss player has currently. Whereas TY has 4 Liberators and 2 Ghosts on the way. he is maxed out, and he is establishing an additional base to obtain an additional lead. There's really no way that Deer can establish a 5th base in these positions without it just being dropped and being taken out of position. And there's no way his army can really defend it because he's going to be so far out of position that his army is then just going to get punished. So TY is just very slowly draining away any chance of Deer to come back in this game. Deer knows that he needs to attack, he needs to be aggressive, and try to make something happen, essentially, with the army that he has. But TY has, that's like 10 Liberators and 10 Vikings at least, and the only anti-air that Deer has are a handful of Stalkers, 3 Archons, and 2 High Templar. Nothing else shoots up. The adepts are very scary in the army, but they're just they're just meat shield. Deer loses 1 base, and he's able to kill 1 base of TY's though, which isn't or TY is able to cure 1 base of Deer's. Deer is able to deny 1 base of TY's. Now Deer is able to deny this 5th base because it's just so hard to defend the 5th base here, and TY loses a lot of stuff. However, although the economy has, for the most part, been evened up, TY does have the superior army, and that's what his trump card is going to be for the rest of the game. As long as he doesn't throw away his army, he doesn't necessarily have to end the game very fast, because neither player can really remake the armies that they have right now. So it's all going to come down to 1 engagement, and so that's what TY understands, and so he's just playing very patiently and waiting for the opportune moment to attack. Now, both players, since they have not been able to establish additional economies, if we look at the top right at their income amount, you can see that their income is crawling because their 3rd bases are essentially mined out. They're really only on like 1 base, half a base economy right now. So this is a very low eco. This has turned into a very low eco game, with both players having very powerful armies. However, 8 Vikings, 10 Liberators, 4 Ghosts, 7 High Templars, not too bad, 8 Stalkers, 4 Archons, very, very small anti-air force, and 29 Adepts. So Deer has been investing the majority of his army into these Adepts, which are not very great against the unit composition that TY has. So Deer has just been posturing around with his army. So what he's done is he's gone over here, then he went there, then he went back there, then he went there, then he went back around, and then now he's going around over here. He's really just trying to find holes in TY's defense, but TY is on top of everything. He knows where Deer's army is ahead of time so that he can get into position, and Deer now has to back up. He ate some bad EMPs, and although Deer has a very scary army, the pressure is all on Deer at this point because 32 Adepts make up the majority of Deer's army. Now Deer is just circling around again. You can, based on his army movements, you can kind of tell that he doesn't know what to do. He's essentially just, it's kind of like in a situation in chess where you're just moving your king from one spot to the other, and the other person is moving their like queen or their rook, and they keep checking you every other turn. And you're forced to move your king because you're going to lose the game if you don't. But at the same time, there's not really any long-term option that you have, besides maybe if TY really messes up on control and possibly takes a really bad engagement, and then like the storms, if all of his units clump up and then he gets stormed a couple times and loses all of his units. Deer's not able to do anything. TY is just slowly pushing forward, sieging forward with the Liberators. Liberators in the back to defend the Bio army, and then the Bio and the Ghosts and the Vikings slowly come out and poke away at things. and that was Deer's last mining base. So the army that Deer has is the army that he has to win with. And with only 8 Stalkers and 2 Archons on the ground, there's literally no way that he has enough anti-air to deal with the Liberators and the Vikings, which is the biggest problem that Deer has to overcome in this army. Trying to get some Tempests out now against the already 13 Viking count. The Tempests are a very desperate plea, or a very desperate play, trying to do something to try to make a win happen. TY very patiently moving back. He killed the 4th base. He didn't want to overextend. And so now he's just backing up and mining more, waiting. Some nice little micro going down from both players. A little stalemate has been created. However, the Vikings do have superior range to the Colossi range. And then the Tempests also, they have longer range. But yeah, the Liberators sieging up forward, and now Deer's forced to go back. Deer really cannot engage this army when it's sieged up, so TY always just keeps the army sieged up. And he just is slowly picking away things one at a time. And now all of Deer's army is essentially gone. 25 Adepts are no good against this unit composition. And Deer has essentially lost this game. This is how most games are probably going to play out on Frost, simply because of the map design, the 5th base being so hard to take, and there's not really any option to expand past your 4th and 5th base as well. Like the 3rd base, you can take a slightly more aggressive one, or you can take a slightly more defensive one. The 4th base is the other 3rd base that you didn't take. But then after that, you either take a hidden 5th base, or you just take a 5th base in the area that's closest, or that's farther away from your opponent. And the predictability and the toughness of being able to secure 5th base is what defines Frost, in my opinion. GG.